You have lost count of how many times you asked someone how they were doing. What you have not noticed is the other count, the one nobody teaches you to keep. How many times someone asked you that same question and actually waited for the real answer? Almost none, and you did not even notice the gap. The phone buzzes and you already know, before you look, that someone needs something. Advice, a shoulder, a fix. It rarely buzzes for any other reason. You have learned to spot the pattern so well that it does not even register as strange anymore. But there is one detail you have never told anyone. When the name on the screen belongs to someone who only calls in crisis, your body reacts before your mind does. A quick, almost invisible tightness in your chest. It is not irritation. It is something else. Something you have never let finish forming. And there is a second detail, even quieter than the first. Somewhere underneath, you feel a small pang of envy toward people who can simply say they are not okay, without justifying it, without apologizing for needing something. You never had that freedom, or at least you think you never did. And when someone, once in a while, asks how you are doing, the answer comes out before you have time to think about it. I'm fine. 2 words. No hesitation. No internal check whatsoever. You do not always notice when you are lying. This did not start yesterday. It has been going on so long it became part of who you are, or who you think you have to be. The one people call when the ground gives out, the one who listens past midnight, who fixes what nobody else wants to touch, who holds what would be too heavy for anyone to hold alone. And underneath the role you play so well, there is a question that never reaches you. Nobody asks what it costs to carry all of it. Nobody asks about the toll. And there is an exact reason that question never comes. A reason you helped build yourself without knowing it. You were trained to be everyone else's safe place. Nobody trained you to be your own. And that sentence, simple as it sounds, is the reason for everything that follows. Look at how it shows up even in your body language. The things nobody else would clock but you. The way you lean in a half-second faster than anyone else in the room when a conversation turns heavy. The way your voice drops into a lower, steadier register the moment someone starts to shake. You built that response so well it runs before you even decide to use it. Notice how it shows up in the small stuff, in the automatic way you ask first if the other person is okay before you have even said hello properly, in the way you hold more information about other people's lives than any one person should hold about somebody else's. But there is a finer detail still, and this is the one that actually stings. You know the exact wedding anniversary of your friends, the name of their mother's doctor, the date of their last layoff. And if someone asked you, right now, when was the last time you cried without being alone, you would not know how to answer. That is not a coincidence, it is training. And every kind of training has an origin most people prefer not to look at too closely. There is a particular kind of loneliness in that, different from the usual kind. It is not the loneliness of being alone, because you rarely are. It is the loneliness of being surrounded and still invisible in the one part that matters most. Hold on to that thought, because it comes back. There is also a version of this loneliness that shows up in the most unexpected places. At a party full of people who keep coming over to talk to you, you might catch yourself, mid-conversation, feeling an enormous distance, as if you were watching everything through glass. Nobody notices. You keep smiling, keep responding, keep being the easy person to be around, but underneath, something is quietly screaming. And nobody hears it because you never let the volume rise high enough for anyone to catch it. Picture a familiar scene, a bar table, a living room, a call that comes in after midnight, someone on the other end unloading, and you sitting there with that posture that has become second nature, shoulders steady, eyes locked in the right words showing up right when they need to. You are not thinking about yourself while it happens. You are thinking about how to help. And when the call ends, when the other person hangs up relieved, something in you sits heavier than before, but nobody ever sees that part. It has no shape. Epictetus wrote a long time ago that people are not disturbed by events but by the opinions they form about them. You have probably lived by that idea your whole life without knowing its name. You learned to read every request for help as proof that you mattered. It worked. For a while, it worked so well it became who you are. But there is a difference between choosing your own response and never having had a choice at all. And it is exactly in that difference, tiny on the outside, enormous on the inside, that this whole thing starts to hurt in a way you have not put words to yet. Here is what nobody told you. Silence is not the absence of pain. Silence is the price you pay for never showing that you feel it too. Picture your strength for a second as a wall. A well-built wall can take weight, take weather, take time. But a wall does not feel anything, only holds. And somewhere along the way, without noticing, you traded feeling for holding. Nobody sets out to do this on purpose. It builds slowly, in the quiet buildup of 1,000 small moments, where you chose to hold it instead of letting it show. And what nobody explained is that once that habit sets in, it stops feeling like a choice. It becomes reflex. Someone cries near you, and before you feel anything for yourself, your hand is already out. You notice this happening, almost as if watching from outside yourself, and still cannot interrupt the motion. It is too automatic to be stopped on purpose. There is a name for this, even though it rarely gets said out loud. It is called compassion fatigue, and it does not show up as ordinary exhaustion. It shows up as a strange distance from yourself, like watching your own life from slightly off to the side. Compassion fatigue does not ask permission before it moves in. It settles in slowly. On a Sunday, you should have spent resting, instead spent solving someone else's problem. And by the end of the day, when a quiet moment finally shows up, what you feel is not relief. It is a hollowness hard to explain, because there is no single event 2.2, just the accumulation. And accumulation, when nobody names it, starts to feel normal. If you have watched the video on this channel about shutting down emotionally, you might recognize this mechanism from a different angle, because what looked like coldness there, that distance, that inability to let anyone in, often comes from the exact same place, the same root. Shutting down and carrying too much can look like opposites from the outside. From the inside, they are often the same wound wearing different clothes. And here is the part nobody warns you about before it happens. While all of this is happening, the people around you get used to how available you are. They just learn, without meaning to, that you are the one who handles it. And slowly, without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened, they stop asking how you are doing, not because they do not care, but because you, without meaning to, taught the people around you that the question was not necessary. You were not abandoned by anyone. You were, gradually, excused from your own vulnerability. Excused is a strange word to use here, because it sounds like relief. In practice, it functions as isolation dressed up as strength. Marcus Aurelius wrote for himself, in notes he never meant for anyone else to read, that we have power over our minds, not outside events, and that realizing this is where strength lives. He was not writing to teach anyone, he was writing to remind himself, because even an emperor needed the reminder daily. And maybe the strength he was describing has nothing to do with holding it all together from the outside. Maybe it is the rarer, harder kind, the strength it takes to admit, even just to yourself, what is actually happening underneath. There is a real difference between managing your reaction to the world and denying that any reaction exists to manage. The first one is wisdom. The second one is exhaustion wearing the costume of discipline. And that is exactly where most people who carry everyone else lose themselves without noticing. Picture a different scene now. Not someone asking you for help. You, alone, after a full day of holding everything together, sitting in some corner of your own house. And for 1 second, just one, letting your face relax, letting your shoulders drop, letting the mask slip a little. Nobody sees that scene. It never gets photographed, never gets mentioned, never becomes a story you tell later. But it happens, almost every day, in the life of someone who carries other people. And it is in that brief, unwitnessed moment that the most honest truth about you lives. You are not weak for feeling that. You are, finally, being real. There is a common confusion, and you may have fallen into it without noticing. The confusion between looking strong and being at peace. Looking strong is a performance aimed outward. Being at peace is something else entirely. It is the absence of internal war, even when nobody is watching, and it is entirely possible to look like the strongest person in the room while, underneath, you have been at war with yourself for years. Real life gives this a familiar face. It is that moment when someone asks how you are, and for a second you consider answering honestly, and then, almost before you notice, the automatic answer takes over. It is that moment when you solve someone's problem at 3 in the morning, without complaining, without asking for anything back, and then sit there afterward, in the dark, feeling a loneliness that has never been named because nobody, not even you, ever validated it. It is that moment when you realize you know everything about other people's lives, but almost nobody around you knows what is going on inside you. And there is a worse moment still. It is when someone compliments your strength, tells you that you are an example, that they wish they had your resilience, and you smile, thank them, maybe even believe it for a second. But somewhere deeper, something tightens, because nobody is complimenting who you are. They are complimenting a role you have played so well it stopped looking like one. And there is a strange thing about compliments like that. The more they pile up, the harder it gets to imagine your own life without that role. Because if you are not the strong one anymore, then who exactly would you be? That question scares you more than the exhaustion itself. And maybe that is why you have never stopped long enough to answer it. Stay here one more second, because the next scene is the hardest one of all. It is the day you actually need help, real help, and you do not know how to ask for it. Not because there is no one around, because you never built the habit. You spent so many years being the point everyone else leaned on that you forgot how to occupy the other side of that arrangement. And when life finally forces the question, your voice catches. The words come out tangled, and in the end you say, again, that you are fine, because asking for help is a language you never had the chance to learn. Seneca wrote, in one of his letters, that it is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they become difficult. What keeps you from showing that you also need something is not the certainty that something bad will happen. It is the fear that it might, a fear that has never actually been tested, because you never gave it the chance to be confirmed or proven wrong. There is no courage in never allowing yourself to need anything. There is only fear, well disguised, dressed up as strength. Think about how many times this scene has repeated, with different faces, over the years. A friend calling in a panic and you dropping everything. A relative falling apart at dinner and you, the one managing the room. A coworker who needs 5 minutes in the hallway before an important meeting. And you, even with your own week in pieces, finding a way to look whole for them. Each of these scenes, alone, looks small. Added up over a lifetime, they form a pattern with a name, even if you never stop to name it. The name is invisible sacrifice. And the problem with invisible sacrifice is not the sacrifice itself. It is the invisibility. Because what goes unseen goes unacknowledged. And what goes unacknowledged, over time, starts to feel like it never happened at all. Few people do it with the consistency you do, and almost none of them notice the cost. Because the cost never shows up anywhere, visible. It builds quietly, like dust in a corner nobody bothers to clean because nobody bothers to look. There is also a newer, quieter version of this. It is the text message you write carefully, editing every word so you do not sound weak or needy, before deleting all of it and sending just "I'm good. Thanks for asking." It is the way you learn to turn requests for help into jokes, because a joke feels lighter, more acceptable. It is also the almost invisible skill you built of standing in a crowded room and still not letting anyone catch what is actually going on behind your eyes. That skill comes with a cost nobody mentioned when you were learning it. The better you get at hiding, the harder it gets for anyone, even someone who genuinely loves you, to notice when you need help without you having to say it out loud. And you rarely say it. And here is the turn that changes everything that came before. You do not need to prove anything to anyone to deserve emotional rest. You do not need to wait for a breakdown to earn permission to feel tired. You do not need anyone to ask first before you finally start asking yourself. This does not mean stopping being who you are. It means giving yourself back a fraction of the care you hand out so generously to everyone except yourself. Maybe it starts small enough to seem unimportant. Next time someone asks how you are doing, before the reflexive "I'm fine" comes out, take one extra beat. Just one. Actually feel what the question lands on. It does not have to turn into a long confession. It just has to for the first time in a long while. Let the question reach somewhere real. That one shift changes the tone of your next hard conversation, even if nobody else notices the change but you. And maybe, over time, that changes how you treat your own exhaustion, too. Instead of pushing it aside for later, you can start noticing it the moment it shows up, not as weakness, but as information. There is a difference between being the person everyone trusts and being the person nobody ever thinks to take care of. The first one is a gift. The second one is a quiet accident that happened while nobody, including you, was paying attention. That accident does not announce itself. It happens one relationship at a time, one favor at a time, until the people around you have quietly rewritten the rules of what they expect from you without ever saying so out loud. And by the time you notice the pattern, it feels too late to renegotiate it, as if changing now would mean admitting you had been performing all along. But it was never a performance. It was survival that got mistaken for personality. If any of this landed the way you recognized it, write it below, with a kind of honesty you probably have not used in a while. If you could answer honestly right now, without worrying about worrying anyone, how are you actually doing? It does not have to be a tidy answer. It does not have to be resolved. It just has to be true. And even if nobody else ever reads that answer, something already shifts. Because from this point on, there is at least one place where the truth got said without disguise. That place is you. Seneca, near the end of his life, wrote that it is not because things are hard that we do not attempt them. It is because we do not attempt them that they become hard. This is not a promise that everything gets easier at once. It is only the first step, the only one that matters right now. Maybe daring here is not some grand gesture. Maybe it is just this. Letting the automatic answer stop coming out first. Letting the truth, for once, arrive before the protection does. And the next time someone, with no idea about any of this, asks how you are doing, maybe you take that one extra beat before answering. Just one. It is enough to start.